And we have science to back that up. We believe in, first and foremost, educating. Second, we also bring people to reconnect with nature. And we have lots of studies to share with you on why that is important. So thank you for including me.
Thank you deeply, Judith. Chris, to you.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Kotcher. I'm the co-founder and co-executive director of a group called Extreme Weather Survivors. And we are building and activating a nationwide network of people who have been directly harmed by extreme weather disasters like wildfires and flooding and hurricanes and extreme heat, both supporting them through trauma-informed programs and also connecting them to opportunities to share their story, to advocate for clean energy policies, more resilience, infrastructure, and funding to support those who've already been harmed by extreme weather. And I have sort of my background is I've worked for about 2 decades in building national survivor communities. I worked at Everytown for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action. And then at the beginning of the pandemic, started an organization called COVID Survivors for Change.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. Joe, to you.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Delamore. I'm a mom and a parenting coach and a Work That Reconnects facilitator. And I'm the author of a book that I just released this year called Raising Children in the Midst of Global Crisis. So I'm really happy to be here and connect with all of you. Should I go right into our little moment, our little practice?
Absolutely. Yeah. That sounds great.
So we have a short time today, but we're going to have this little moment where we can just tap in to our own inner wisdom and become present here together. And we're going to start by just doing kind of a word association game. So I'm going to say a word and I'm going to ask you to type into the chat anything that comes to mind when you hear this word. So I'm going to say ice cream. Go ahead and type in words and phrases and anything that comes to mind. So we've got yum, cone, sweet, summer, cone. Oh, I've got to make my chat bigger so I can see. Chocolate, nice. Great. Mom's favorite dessert, beautiful. Okay. Now what happens when I say cats? What's the word or phrase that comes to mind? Refreshing. I think that's for ice cream. Sneeze, whiskers, cute. Mom again. Nice. Companion, snuggles. Raining. Cats and dogs. Okay, beautiful. So what happens when I say the environment? What words and phrases come to mind for you? Lush, peaceful, people, trees, green, crisis, healing, changing, worry, hopeless, all-encompassing, neglected, crisis again, fire, protector. Beautiful. So let's just feel into that a little bit. Our relationship with the environment, the feelings, the thoughts that come to us. And as we tap into that, I'm going to invite you to experience a very, very simple Work That Reconnects practice that we call an open sentence. Basically, it's going to just be the beginning of a sentence, and then you complete the sentence in your own way. So, typing it into the chat, a place that was magical or wonderful to me as a child was. And I invite you to just like think about that for a second and feel into it. You can share in the chat and or you can raise your hand and we'll maybe take just a couple of responses there. A place that was magical or wonderful to me as a child was. I see the woods by my parents' house, the lake, my river in Jamaica, the park near my house first thing in the morning before anyone else came outside, my imagination, backyard, Ventnor, New Jersey beach, my grandparents' garden, mom's arms, a rowboat with my dad. Every single one of us had some magical, wonderful connection with the world, with the living world, with whatever living beings we were surrounded by when we were children. So I just invite us to carry that into our conversation today and just like hold that in our hearts as we enter into this conversation. Okay.
Thank you, Joe. And I think maybe before we transition to speaking, just a gentle reminder again that what Joe has just offered us is something that we can take, both the experience of it and how we are transformed by this conversation and the actual practice itself. So maybe also when you leave here today, you know, contemplate where some of these simple practices, you could weave those in, whether it's with your kids, you know, the Thanksgiving dinner table. Maybe if you have these kinds of conversations, it would be a very different space. Yeah, where in your world and in your lives, you know, can these tools be of benefit? So I think from here, if we can turn it over to Judith, if Judith, if you're ready to share more about your work and what's going on in your world.
Oh, I'd like to share first and foremost the Nature Gap. It's a study that was done by the Center of American Progress, and I don't think that it's widely known. Sorry about that. And when I found that it was done in July 2020, and so at the bottom and the crux of the study, it's confronting the racial and economic disparities in the destruction. And I found it odd that they would include the protection of nature in America. And it's by Jenny Rowland Shea, Sahir Doshi, Shauna Edberg, and Robert Fanger. If you guys want to, and I implore you to download it and go through it, because there's some critical information included in here. And how does this relate to the Hero Nurturing Center? First and foremost, healing, empathy, redemption, oasis. The healing, the empathy, and the redemption, we believe, cannot happen without the proper environment, which we deem the oasis. And if the oasis is in trouble, so are we. And I wanted to include this conversation because most of the time that we hear pundits and folks alike talking about the destruction of nature, hardly ever are we, the people, included in that destruction. And so Hero focuses on trauma resilience, healing from trauma, and finding the tools that are necessary for that journey to begin. For some of us, it may take a month, 2 months, 2 years, 3 years. Some of us, it will be a lifelong journey. And so in the introduction and summary of the study, the first thing that's mentioned is clean drinking water. And the second thing is clean air. And when I researched this, I thought, why did they not put public parks, biodiversity, open spaces, and the like, list those things first? Well, the health of the human beings is intricately connected to the health of the earth, right? And so the first things, as in Michigan, we see the water quality affects us not just on a physical level or just on the momentary level, but it affects us for generations. And I'm sure the people in Michigan can relate to this. Research. So the crisis tools that are heart-centered would be to make sure that we are educated first and foremost. And the nature gap is someplace to start for just a beginner or someone who doesn't even know anything about the effects or the disaffectedness of the climate change on human beings and the earth alike. And so within the nature gap study, you have a breakdown of every facet of how this affects people and the planet. And so again, I would implore you to go through it, and there are tools in there as well. Deep breathing is one of the things that Hero Nurturing Center advocates, and that's simply breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth systemically. The other thing that we're addressing, again, is the interconnectedness with mental health, mental healing, and the land. And so it's common sense will tell us if the land is sick, then so are we as people. How do we fix this? In conjunction, we start planting our own foods. Instead of planting lawns, we can start planting our own fruits, our own herbs, establishing herb gardens. The other thing that the study touches on is the disconnect from the land, the disconnect from green things. There's also another study that I'd like to highlight, and I'm sitting in the sun purposefully to get some vitamin D, is the nature deficit disorder. It's another study that I'm hoping that you guys will look into, and it talks about the deterioration of green spaces and how bringing back those spaces would aid in the repair and the resilience of not just the planet, but the people as well, and how the lack of green things affects our cognitive abilities, meaning we have less empathy, we have less patience, we have less compassion, because in conjunction, not just solely because of the lack of green things, but that's part of the problem. And I'll just pass it on to another speaker and I'll come back. Or if anybody has any questions, I'll jump in.
Thank you, Judith, for setting the stage and offering some resources for, I think, people to go and learn a little bit more, especially some of the terminology feels really important. I think it's thinking especially because part of, I think, Chris, what you're going to talk about is about advocacy, and it can be very challenging to advocate for some of these things in decision-making spaces, whether it's in your neighborhoods or at a much broader level. We also don't have the common language or what some of the definitions are, right? To be able to go in and say, I'm really concerned about things like nature deficit disorder. So be able to unpack that a little bit. And it'd be great, Judith, and maybe in our panel, we can do that more too. So thank you for sharing that. Chris, we're going to switch over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. First, the caveat, I am at actually an insurance innovation conference. So it's really interesting being here because I think, part of thinking about as you're, advocating in policy spaces, part of what we're talking, or I was invited to speak at the insurance conference, is thinking about how do you ensure nature and how do you add value? How do you capture some of the value that we're talking about? And, one of the things that I really think about in my work that I think of as sort of sitting at that intersection between advocacy and trauma is how do you maintain your own well-being so that you can continue to advocate for the things that matter and are important? I think we talk a lot about emotional well-being, we talk a lot about advocacy, but actually like prioritizing your own well-being as an advocate is crucial for that. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And hopefully I will not be, people keep on coming into the room, but hopefully it'll be all good. So I want to start by just saying, advocacy actually can be healing, right? When done with the right support, with the right networks to help you do that work. So advocacy can be healing, it can be rewarding, but it's also really important to recognize that advocacy has a cost, right? There's time that it takes up, there's energy, there's being vulnerable and exposing yourself to judgment from others. There's privacy that you're giving up potentially if you're sharing your story in a public space. And it also gives back, right? So there's a purpose, there's opportunities, and there's a lot of research recently on the psychology of advocacy and around making purpose when you've experienced and survived a trauma. And so I think one of the things to think about is, you know, we talk a lot about being trauma informed. And what does that mean, right? So being trauma informed means that you are realizing the widespread impact of trauma. We have it's been a long 10 years, or is it long, I don't know, long many years, right? But I think in particular, the political climate over the past 10 years, the pandemic over the past few years, there is a lot of collective trauma that even you know, under the best of circumstances that people have lived through. So you don't always know what people are bringing into the space that you're inhabiting, right? So that's really important to recognize that. Recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma, responding by fully integrating knowledge of trauma as you're thinking about it. And so part of what I'm going to talk about today is some practical tips and tools to help do that. And I think really importantly, resisting re-traumatization, resisting your own re-traumatization, but also building programs that you are actively trying to avoid re-traumatizing others that you're working with. So we have this acronym. It's a little hokey, but it's called CARE. It makes, you know, I'm as I get older, harder and harder. I go back to, like, you know, how I used to remember like history things when I was a kid, right? So acronym, so CAN that we use. So C is clear, authentic communication. A is active, empathic listening. R is respect, autonomy, and choice. And E is empowerment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what each of those things mean in practice. So clear and authentic communication. So that means, and this, you know, this is some of this as I look at this, right? It could be, it's also just useful in life, in relationships, in parenting, community, organizations. But clear and authentic communication means that you're communicating clearly, and setting expectations early so that you know what you're bringing into the conversation and other people know what they can expect from that conversation. It's knowing your own boundaries, making the implicit explicit. One of the best things I ever heard is it's a lot, this phrase, this advice is it's a lot easier to loosen boundaries than to tighten boundaries. So start with an understanding of what your boundaries are, maintain them. And if you want to loosen them, that's okay. But if you start with no boundaries and you're like, wow, you're really, you know, this is crossing my line, that's a much harder thing to rein in. And give yourself permission and grace to make mistakes. Give others permission and grace to make mistakes. Not the same mistake over, right? And over repeatedly. That's not grace. But I think about, one of the things that I try to bring into my advocacy work is to never make the same mistake twice, right? So make mistakes, give people grace to make those mistakes, but learn from those mistakes. And I think, you know, one of the things to think about with that is, you know, how to be an active, empathic listener. So I think sometimes we think, okay, well, when people are coming up, I don't know what to say, right? One of the gun violence survivors I worked with said to me when I first was getting to know him, his son had been killed in a shooting. And he said, I lost half of my family and friends in that first year, right? Because people don't know what to do with grief. We as a nation, generally speaking, do a terrible job of talking about grief, of holding space for grief. I've seen that in my own life. And so I think that, but at the same time, it doesn't mean you have to be a trained counselor, right? It's just as simple as, how are you doing today? One of the things I like to, how are you hanging in there, right? Hanging in there means I'm giving you space to say, you know, okay, I'm doing well, I'm not doing well. I don't want to be like, hey, everything good? You know, that alone can feel sometimes a little bit disauthentic. So just giving the place, the space to create that, and then just validation, right? I think about this all the time as a parent. I don't always do it, but there's so many times, right? I've got a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old. My 10-year-old now is in 6th grade. She's starting middle school, right? And there's all these like emotions that are coming in the door, and it's usually not about what she's actually upset about. And so rather than just doing what we always try to fix things, right? Try to make things better, try to come with solutions, just say, that must have been really hard. That must be really hard. You know, I'm so sorry that you're going through that. You know, I can't imagine. I alternate sometimes. I can't imagine, or sometimes I think what we want people to imagine, right? We want people to imagine what it means to go through gun violence, what it means to go through an extreme weather disaster. Because if we're imagining it, we're building empathy, and then we're also recommitting and building a stronger practice to fight to make sure it doesn't happen to other people. So I think just, that validation, conveying acceptance is really important. I think, one of the other things, respect, autonomy, and choice. So one of the things I like to say, your story, your choice every single time, right? You may have said yes a million times. That doesn't mean you need to say yes on the millionth and one time. You can say yes a million times, but also maybe you're having a difficult day. You had a tough day at work. It's the anniversary of a difficult day, right? Any number of reasons. So giving people the space to say yes, but don't presuming that what that yes is. Don't tell people what they should be feeling. Don't use presumptive phrases. Oh, why are you still not over that, right? I mean, you would imagine the things that people say that come with that loaded value of judgment that just make people feel diminished. Even as simple, working with different people with different experiences. Oh, my story is not as bad as yours, right? We are so hardwired as humans to put each other in hierarchies, and really just creating space to understand not bad or worse, but different kinds of loss and experience. And then empower, right? So honor that previous loss of power. If you have something traumatic happen to you, you lose power, you lose control, can be incredibly disorienting. So, really resist that urge to rescue or fix. I really need to work on that one in my own personal life, as my wife tells me all the time. But I think really remembering that just people hearing that validation is really important. And some people, they may never want to share their story because it's hard. And for all the reasons that we talked about, the cost that comes with that. And that's okay too. So talking a little bit about self-care, just to sort of name some of this, right? So there are 6 types of self-care. There's emotional, practical, physical, mental, social, and spiritual. So I like to just tell people, think about what works for you, right? I'm not a spiritual person. My brother is, right? And so we draw different benefits and different healing from different kinds of self-care. So for me, listening to music, taking walks at night, those are the things that work really well for me. Think about what works for you, and be intentional and deliberate about it. And think about it, self-care is part of the cost of doing advocacy, right? Think about it in the same way that you think about, I'm going to make sure I want to organize, I want to, build groups, I want to all the things that go into that. So protecting yourself and building your self-care practice so that you can continue doing the work that you care about is really important. I want just everyone to think about, and I want to wrap up because I know we have other really incredible speakers, but just acknowledge that it's tough, right? There are challenges to self-care, health issues, time, money, motivation, guilt, right? Oh my God, I feel so bad. I haven't done anything. Okay. And you get in this rut, right? So think about, acknowledge and validate your own challenges that you have for practicing self-care. Even just so that, giving yourself that grace to say, I'm going to not do a fully baked, plan of self-care. I'm going to do one thing a week, right? Just give yourself, I'm going to do 5 minutes a day. What Judith was talking about, the deep breathing. I love that. That is, I can do it in 2 minutes and it really just like resets me so much. Doesn't get me all the way where I need to be sometimes, but it is helpful. And I think plan for it, right? You don't go on vacation without planning. You don't do work without planning. We don't do anything without planning, really, right? So plan for self-care. Make a plan. Have accountability buddy, right? Have someone who you can go for that walk with each night. You're going to be more likely to prioritize self-care if you have someone who's going to help hold yourself accountable. And then the last thing I'll just say is think about self-care. Right? Self is in the word self-care. Self-care is not just about yourself, though. We're all part of communities. We're part of families. We're part of organizations. There are things we can control, and there are things that we can't control. And so I like to think about what are the things that I can control and what are the things that I can't control. I can control what I'm doing. I can't control what's happening in the country. I can influence, but I can't control, right? If you're on a team, at my last job, we used to talk about it as individual, team, and organization, right? So what are the things that we as a team can agree to, right? What are the things that we as a team can advocate for in the organization? So being mindful that those are three different categories, and you have a increasing amount of control as it gets to the individual level. But there are things, even if the organization is not going to be what you want it to be, your community group is not going to be what you're going to want it to be, the PTA is not going to be what you want it to be. There are things that you and your friends and your tribe of people can maintain. And I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Chris.
If I
Um,
may, if
yeah,
I
go ahead.
may interrupt
course.
so when I'm sorry, Chris was speaking, everything that he said is absolutely on point. And so just let me just talk about story sharing for a moment. So normalization of therapists, family members, friends, and alike, and even the person who is going through or surviving the trauma, it's been normalized to share your story, right? But Hero believes the opposite. That can be just as traumatizing as living the experience. And so we want to allow for the individual, when they're ready, to share, whether it's bits or pieces of their story, because we've normalized the re-traumatization. It's just as when we're watching a school shooting, right? And it's on loop on TV constantly. How do we think that the family members are feeling every time that incident is looped on the news, or they're hearing the conversation, whether it's on the train or to work or what have you? So we want to be mindful of that. We also want to talk about and reinforce the self-care that Chris talked about. So that could look like anything and different things for many people. Some of us don't have a support system. Some of us are alone. So what do you do when you're alone? Well, Hero advocates emotional intelligence, and it simply means being familiar or being educated on the difference between your emotions that are hardwired in your body and the feelings that are produced because of those emotions and the experience that you're going through at the time. So emotional intelligence awareness is critical. The self-care could be a massage if you don't have people to administer that for you, if you can afford it, right? Some of the spas will give you a discount for student rates. A walk, if you don't have a park next door to you or within the walk-in vicinity of you, then a simple going to the grocery store and walking up and down the aisles, right? Or even because they always have a plant and flower department. So again, if you're not adjacent to a park or have access to Florida, this is where I am right now for self-care. I've not gone anywhere in a long time. So again, talking about self-care. How do you know when to step away from your work, right? And so Hero advocates two things when you're going through trauma. And that could be just living everyday life, just struggling to survive. And so two things we advocate: get enough rest. Restful sleep is one of the most important things next to nutrient-rich foods that you want to put into your body. And then the last thing is movement. Move, move, move. You don't have to jog, you don't have to run, but if you can sit in your chair and move your arms, move your legs, move your neck, absolutely, then that's progress. And so lastly, be gentle with yourself. We don't know everything. We can't know everything. And again, find community however you can, whether it be a church if you're religious, a synagogue where there are people, or a neighbor who may understand what you're going through, or find a support group that's for people who are going through what the thing that you're experiencing. So thank you, Lee and Chris.
Yeah, thank you to you both. And I think maybe Joe, before we switch over to you, as just lifting up and you're mentioning about like where to make those connections and spaces like this, right, as well. So to take a look around at all the people who are here, right? We all are a connection for each other and a support. And the beauty of the online space can be that it can facilitate not necessarily the black hole we can sometimes get in where you're online and now you're online for 10 hours, but this can be the space within which you connect with community and then community can draw you out, right? You find the people here and then go for that collective walk in the woods you didn't know existed, or find a friend to go walk the grocery store aisles. I'm going to walk grocery store aisles very differently now. Okay, so thank you to you both. And we'll switch it over to Joe. Joe, if you want to share some of your wisdom.
Thank you so much. Oh, it's great to be here. And I've got to say, like Judith said, everything that Chris said and everything that Judith said is really resonant and connected with what I experience and know to be true too. So it's wonderful to be kind of pooling our experience together in this way. So as I mentioned before, I'm a Work That Reconnects facilitator. I also work on staff at the Work That Reconnects network. And it looks like Rachel just put the link to the Work That Reconnects network website in there. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the Work That Reconnects because it is a resource that can be used in all of these ways. It's a body of group work that was developed in mostly by Joanna Macy. Joanna Macy is the root teacher, but she developed it in collaboration over the last 50 years with co-conspirators and friends and comrades from all over the world. And it's developed into a really powerful body of work that can be tapped into either through just even reading the books that she's written or listening to her speak, but mostly through interacting in groups. And so just a very quick resource, if you go to that website, you'll find a calendar of events where there are facilitated experiences happening in person all over the world and also online. So they're actually quite accessible to tap into. And what they allow us to do is to be honest about what's happening in the world and in our lives, and to tap into and engage our innate intelligence and metabolize our blocked or stifled emotions to help us reconnect with the experience and the awareness that we're actually part of the living world, that we are here in what Thich Nhat Hanh called interbeing, in intelligent interbeing. So one of the key principles that we work with in the Work That Reconnects is deep ecology. This is us actually being members of this web of life that is living, breathing, communicating through us all of the time. And so we may have been conditioned by modernity or through trauma or through colonization and imperialism to think somehow that we're separate. And to be in this, hyper individualized, hyper intellectual orientation. But the reality is we're Earth. We're Earth expressing herself. We are Earth. Everything is Earth. Our bodies, our bones, our flesh, our blood, our breath is nature. So here we are gathered by Zoom, but we're nature, right? We're here connecting with each other. And even all of our thoughts and all of this stuff, your computer, your device, your iPhone, it all came from Earth. There's nothing that's not Earth. And so one of the issues that we're finding, with the crises that we're facing, the problems, the particular issues, this polycrisis that we're facing here, is that it's a crisis of leading from that separation, from thinking that we're separate and thinking that somehow we can hoard or gather those materials and block them from the flow of life. So, whether that's wealth or minerals or, different ways in which we've managed our extractive capitalist engagement on the earth, we're somehow stopping that flow of life. And this has major consequences for, obviously the health of the earth herself, but all of us. And so our mental health and our physical health, we're all, there's no separation between us as humans and the earth that we live with. So I feel like a big part of our work right now needs to be in unblocking that flow and relearning how to live in alignment with and cooperation with the design of the living world. Learning that design, like learning that intelligence. What is the intelligence of the earth, and how can we develop our capacity for cooperating with earth? And I love this theme of reimagining our relationship with land that this event is part of, or I don't quite understand, but like that was the theme that was told to me. And so, yeah, reimagine our relationship with land. Who are we in the land? How is the land feeding us and supporting us and nourishing us? How can we cooperate with and support the well-being of the land through the way that we live and through the way that we interact? And yeah, and this comes down to like a deconditioning of the condition and the paradigm that we've been trained into. So a big part of this is learning how to remember, working on that remembering and unblocking that flow. So Lee was telling me when we had our initial conversation about a depaving project that Crew is doing. And I love that. I think it's a very tangible and physical example of this unblocking, right? So you can almost imagine like the land is actually organic, living, breathing, right? And we've paved and blocked this energy. So as we're removing that pavement and bringing in pollinator gardens and, more interactive, maybe water flow, then it's like, oh yeah, let's let Earth breathe and let's learn through that process how we breathe with Earth, how we connect with Earth, how we are now going to move differently on Earth, with Earth. So I think that's just also beautiful. Another example of this kind of unblocking and deconditioning is the one that I focus on in my work is engaging with parents and supporting parents to relearn how to live in alignment with the natural world through their parenting experience. Like to really actually use that opportunity of being a parent to remember what it is to be human, to remember what it is to be human with Earth, and to bring those errant pieces of our memory back together and learn how to listen to the earth and be guided by the earth and follow natural systems. I personally think that kids are like the perfect teachers of this. I mean, if you've had the blessing and the opportunity to interact with a newborn and to actually pay attention, what does a newborn need? They're going to tell you exactly what it means to be human. Slow down, hug each other, pay attention and listen, be tender in that way. And then of course, toddlers, as they turn into babies and toddlers and they get curious, that's learning, that's paying attention, that's being present. And if you go on a walk with a 2-year-old, it's going to take a half an hour to walk 10 feet because they're so in awe, of the world around us. It invites us to actually reawaken that awe, that reverence. So I'm always encouraging parents to pay attention to, take the lead from, and cooperate with their children in learning how to be here in Earth, with Earth, and learning how to be here in a way that actually creates a benefit to everything around us, to lean into mutual thriving. I feel like my work teaches parents to decondition out of the power over paradigm and start aligning with the thriving life paradigm. So I'll just reference Robin Wall Kimmerer is the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, which is one of my just favorite books. She teaches about mutual thriving. All thriving is mutual. Nobody's doing okay if everybody isn't doing okay, right? So that can be practiced and engaged right in our own homes. That's one of the things I love about that. That's a really big concept, that can be practiced right there in our relationships with our children and in our homes. So how are we all doing okay here in this house? What are all the needs? How can we meet the needs in a way that everybody is empowered and everybody is benefiting? It's very simple practice to bring right into our homes that has ecological effects. So I'll share that I've got, as I mentioned, I wrote a book recently and I facilitate programs for parents. And so I have some links for that. I don't know, maybe we share that at the end. Lee, is that better? Or should I pop them in the chat?
Yeah, you're welcome. Or Rachel, do you have a preference?
Yeah, or just you can go ahead and throw them in the chat.
So great. Oh, so fun to be here with everybody. I do have a program starting in 2 days and it only has 2 spots in it. So it's like, if you want to jump in, you have to jump right on it. But other than that, those resources are available.
Thank you, Joe. And I love the word tumultuous. I'm like, oh, the word, it is what it is. Like, that's the word. It matches the definition so well. So yeah, so now we want to give 15-ish minutes or so we have for more just kind of open conversation. We do have a couple questions that we can start with. We were just wanted to see, given there's obviously the different buckets or focuses that each of you as speakers are involved in. And we're curious, some of the questions we have are more about kind of seeing like the connections across. And so maybe before we do that, I know everyone's now there's still more listening and receiving to do here. And before that, just giving opportunity to, maybe we could do like that quick 30-second movement, that breath, the breathing that everybody was talking about. So maybe if you want to take this opportunity to just let what's been shared thus far soak in, you can kind of, if you want to, just some shoulder stretches, your arms, and take one deep breath in, and then keep breathing. But at least one breath in through your nose, out the mouth. So yeah, so let's reconnect here in more of a dialogue. Although at the same time, I'm so grateful that you all are already sort of doing it, across. So this, I think, will be very easy in terms of everybody talking with each other. So the first question that, Joe, you already talked about it a little bit because of your focus on parents, and one of the things that we were just curious about is maybe even expanding that, thinking about different collectives or populations. What about, so parents, kids, families, chosen families, or other populations that you've worked with? Are there any unique issues that they have shared with you, and then that your programs and practices specifically help address or heal? And then there's also the piece of it, always wondering about what wisdom they've taught you, what you've learned from them. And whoever, is there anyone in particular who might want to share first? And if you all want to come off, the speakers come off mute for a more organic dialogue, that's fine too. Judith, go for it.
So to finish up with what the Centers for American Progress has suggested that will help to fix or mend some of these disparities that have particularly been concerning over the paving and erasure of nature. So it says and I'll quote it directly, to correct for the inequitable distribution of nature in America, among other barriers that racially and economically marginalized communities, as well as LGBTQ and disabled people face to accessing the outdoors. This report put forth several recommendations for policymakers to consider, including creating more close-to-home outdoor opportunities in communities of color and low-income communities, changing hiring and workplace practices in government agencies, nonprofits, and foundations to create more representative leadership teams, boards, and staff, improving consultation with tribal nations, and pursuing more opportunities for tribal co-management of natural resources, and working to overcome the nature gap among children by bolstering education and outreach programs. Broadly, however, the findings of this report affirm an urgent need for the United States to pursue an ambitious goal of protecting at least 30% of lands and oceans by 2030. And so those are some of the solutions that the Center for American Progress believes that will aid and foster in the repair of not just the land, but humans as well. So I found that very interesting that they included the Native Americans in co-managing. And again, to go back to what Joe was saying about reimagining, right? And who were better stewards of the earth than the indigenous and the Native Americans.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and it's actually an interesting concern that I have about protecting land. And so because our kind of modern official policy around protecting land is to prevent humans from engaging with it. And so that's not really like an ancient indigenous way of being at all. The humans are an essential aspect of the ecosystem. And I was just trying to find the link here, and maybe I will in a second, but Lila June Johnston is a Dene woman from New Mexico who is absolutely brilliant speaker and scholar, and artist, musician, and all of this. But so she recently did her doctoral program on let me see if I can think of the phrase that I should use for this. On basically indigenous practices of land management and ancient ways of actually being beneficial keystone species in our ecosystems. I'm going to try to find that link so I can pop it in the chat. It is absolutely brilliant, and it transforms the way that we think about protecting the environment, more of actually engaging in the revitalization, the regeneration of the environment, and finding that human place that makes sense within the environment.
Chris, did you want to also share? Thank you.
Yeah, I can share that one of the things that I have been hearing a lot from the folks that we work with in the extreme weather survivor space, that I think people don't quite, it's sort of new for them to handle. So two things. One is just dealing with extreme heat and pregnancy in young children. So right, we work with a woman who just actually gave birth to a healthy baby a couple weeks ago. But I was talking to her and she said, pediatricians, no one's talking about the impact of extreme heat on being pregnant, let alone defining what extreme heat is. And just, what we know about how, small bodies, babies are able to regulate their temperature. So that's one thing I think that I hear a lot about, just, not knowing the impact of how the weather and climate is changing, what the impact on people is, especially children. And two, the emotional trauma of, working, some of the small businesses that we work with who, their businesses were flooded. In order to get the loan to reopen their business, they had to put their home up as collateral. And not only is that obviously stressful for, putting stress on, existing family, but also just, what one person said to me, do I talk to my kids? I want them to, we're family. I want them to know what we're going through, but I don't want to stress them out. So I think there's just like so much that's changing, and the emotional impact of that. I think we're just, beginning to unpack how to support people as they're dealing with these new stressors and traumas in their life.
Well, Chris, to follow that up, I'd just like to introduce the fact that the style of learning in this country is also, you know, and it seems away from the conversation, but part of the problem, right? So I've done 5 delegation tours in Cuba, and they have a different style of education. It's called popular education. And just for briefly, for folks who aren't familiar with the terminology, the idea of popular education was created by a Brazilian educator. His name is Paulo Freire. And there are 6 points that encompasses popular education. One is inclusive and accessible to people with a variety of educational levels, right? Second, addresses the issues people face in their respective communities. 3, moves people toward a place of action. 4, develops new grassroots leadership. 5, is based on the lived experiences of those participating in the learning. And lastly, it incorporates non-traditional methods of learning, such as poetry, music, or visual arts. So again, when we think about how it is that we are going to reimagine, re-educate, especially the younger folks. Well, I want us to do everybody, right? Not to single out the children, the adults. Educate the masses and re-educate us on the importance of the air. Just even that. Start with the air being clean, right? And how that connection between the air and our feeling depressed, name it, feeling confused, not being able to concentrate in school, not being able to concentrate at work, all of these things that society says is your personal fault while you're experiencing these things. We forget that the environment is 90% of the feel-good hormones that we experience. So again, the way we approach the teaching and the education of our communities, our neighbors, is I think, the most important piece of this.
Great, beautiful. Do you mind if is it okay to keep going here, Lee? Okay. So thank you for that point there. That's a big point that Joanna Macy makes in the foundation of the work that reconnects, is that your pain, your grief, your frustration, your anger is not a personal pathology. It is a very sane response to an unwell experience, an unwell environment, an unwell interbeing. And so that's huge. And like I love the way that you described it. It's like actually the things that would make us feel well or unwell, all those hormones, all those chemicals, they're actually like communications from our environment. So it's kind of another way of putting what Joanna says so beautifully there about, like, don't let anybody convince you that it's that you're the problem. Like, you're the response. And your intelligent response is telling you what the problem is, right? And then we can address it from there. And I kind of wanted to touch back to Chris, to something that you said there around, like, how do we support and inform our children without overwhelming them? I've got to tell you, that is the #1 reason that parents come to work with me. And that is the thing that I hear from every single parent is, I'm aware of all these things that are happening and they're weighing on me emotionally, deeply, whether it's school shootings or wildfires in my community or war, raging on the borders. I work with people all over the world. So, they may be in very close proximity to war. How do I have that in my consciousness and awareness and raise these little ones and be honest with them, but not like dump it on them? And that's just like this huge question all of the time. And so we're always looking at like, how are we working with our children at age appropriate levels to understand the interconnectedness and the wholeness of our being. Like, we're all here together. And so as we're learning and looking, even whether it's like houseless population in our community, how can we have a conversation with a 3-year-old about why this person is not in a home? You know, why is this person here on the sidewalk? And how can we be curious and open and compassionate, both with, you know, ourselves, our children, and the experiences or people that we're interacting with. And I feel like, you know, like people say, how do I talk to my kids about climate change? And my answer is all the time, ongoingly, in all of the little moments, in all of those little interactions, so that it's not like a thing that's separate that we're going to have a big talk about when you get to that age, because they're going to get information, they're getting information from every other angle besides you. So make sure that you're a person in their lives that they can be understanding the world with.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, that really resonates with me. And I think, you know, we do a terrible job in this country of talking to kids about things. We teach, and by, you know, thinking about what you talk to your kids about communicates a lot, and what you don't talk to your kids communicates a lot, right? So by not communicating, you know, you're teaching your children to be scared of things, to not have the language to talk about things. And like what you said, obviously, with like, you know, age appropriate level, I think is spot on. But I think even just, you know, thinking about like parental loss and talking to my kids about that, right? You know, we talking to kids honestly, directly about what you're experiencing is never, you know, the wrong move. But also letting them know that, you know, that it has to be age appropriate. And I think, you know, for like what the example I was referencing, right, which is, you know, the single mother whose business was devastated in a flood and was wondering, you know, am I going to lose my home? Can I feed my kids? That's a different thing than like, you know, everyday stressors, right? And so making sure that have the tools and the resources to do that in an age appropriate way. But I think, you know, it's almost never the answer that you don't talk to your kids about it, right? It's how you talk to it and how you talk to them, and the words you use, the support you give them, is really key to that.
To add with that is also your actions, right? So I don't know if you guys could see. So there's these banana trees in my brother-in-law's yard that he planted himself. And so actions, my mother didn't necessarily talk to my sisters and brothers about the environment, but we always had a garden where alongside when she was doing gardening, she gave us a little spot where we could plant whether seed beans or, you know, whatever it was. We would get the little package and we'd plant things on our own. And so I think we lead by example. One of my mentors said to me a few years back that children, what we do, right? Not just what we say, but they follow our actions. And so without, I believe, in Hero's philosophy, this is why we do nature walks. You know, we help people to plant things. We take them into nature and we say, you know, just let's go for a healing walk. And while we're doing that, there's a mountain of things that are happening at the same time, right? You're being connected with whether the tree or the leaves or the grass or a bug or an animal that you may see while you're on the walk. So there are many ways to educate and emulate the care of nature without necessarily creating some kind of another thing for children to have to, you know, be burdened or seem like another thing like school or another chore. Make it fun where you're playing outside in the backyard more often than indoors watching TV, right? Make it a thing where you go outside barefoot. If you have a lawn, if you can't find one, you find a park next to you or close to you where you can be barefoot. and your children see that you're not afraid to get your feet dirty, then again, they will emulate these things. And so again, lead by example.
So I just, it's sort of, first I had a little joke going to be like, I walk barefoot through the grocery store aisles. So it's imagining this like, reclaim the grocery store as land, people, we could do it. And place in our communities for practice together. So I'll be mindful of time. I know we only have a couple of minutes here, so I think if it works for you all, maybe this is where people are feeling complete with what's been shared so far. We'll wrap our time together. Maybe if there's any final thoughts from any of the speakers, and then I can close us out. And I just want to name, I know we had mentioned in the chat about opportunities for questions. So if anybody wants, we're going to follow up with an email, talk about that, and contact info. So if you have any additional questions, or you always can send them to our team, and we will get them to any of the speakers to share their wisdom more. But please feel free, even in the last minute here, while we're wrapping, if you have a link or there's some cool project or something, you're welcome to share that, and we'll make sure to share that out in the notes. So maybe just if Joe, Judith, and Chris, before I do a very quick closeout here, if there's any additional
One
thoughts.
last tip. So the sun isn't just for like a tan, right? So easy peasy dopamine, stand in the sun, go outside, get some fresh air. That's an easy peasy, relaxing thing to do while you breathe deeply in through your nose, out through your mouth if you can't find a park close to you. And also a nice hot bath with some Epsom salt. Do a nice soak, and that will rejuvenate you as well. Have a nice day, everyone, and just thank you so much for including me in this conversation.
Thank you, Judith. And Joe or Chris, if there's anything else, and if you're feeling complete, that's okay too.
Just want to say thank you. This is really fun, really beautiful. Thanks.
Nope, that's nothing to add. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Maybe one quick thing Judith, you made me think too, and a practice that I did for a while, and then you reminded me to reconnect with it, or the beauty of looking up at the sun or into the sky too, it has also helped me reconnect in process of grieving. So, and it also can be incorporated so to be able to kind of look up and be in the sun and breathe and reconnect with anyone that I've lost. And then also, you can, if you're thinking of when can I work that in, how would I remember to do that? Crossing thresholds or changes from one space to another can be opportunities for that. So what I, again, haven't done in a while, but you've reminded me, when I'm coming home and I'm about to walk in the front door, like that's a great opportunity to just be like, before I go in, stand here, breathe, eyes open or closed, look up at the sky, and then take that in. So transitions are great opportunities for that. So I'm just going to real quick just share my screen.
And don't be afraid to perspire.
That's so important.
Don't be afraid to perspire a little bit, because sweating releases toxins out of your body. So don't be afraid of it.
Appreciate that. So so just continuing the gratitudes that have already been shared by our speakers. Just want to name quickly here next steps. We have ours, and then you have a next step too. So our next step as a team here at Crew is to continue on with Climate Preparedness Week. You'll see here at the bottom, just want to name real quick, we do have another event. Joe, thank you. You already gave me the shout out for depaving. That's going to be this Thursday, same time. You can go back into those emails or to our website or to this bit.ly link here, and you can join us on Thursday if you'd like. And then we're gonna have teams from all over the US who are doing depaving in different ways. On our end, we will make sure to follow up in the next week with an email to you all and to everyone in our network with the recording of this gathering, the slides, any of the links that are in the chat. We will also send a brief feedback survey, and then any other emerging ideas that you all shared today. And then we're always thinking about how to, grow Climate Prep Week and make it more awesome for next year. So any ways that you all are open to supporting that, we are grateful for it. And then lastly here, I think Joe, aligned with, we mentioned Robin Wall Kimmerer, so we do have a quote that I just found very, just very appropriate for the moment. So we have the land knows you, right? Even when you are lost, and that reminder again that we are nature. So thank you for that. And just thank you again, Judith, Chris, Joe, to everybody who's here, Rachel. And this is where we leave you all. Thank you again, everybody. Go out in nature, hug a tree, connect. Bye, everybody.